All right, Holly, good to go.
Thank you. Welcome everybody this morning to the Policy and Personnel meeting, and I would like to call the meeting to order. It's now 9:16 a.m. and Stephanie, if you would take attendance, please.
Good morning, everyone. Ava Bermuda Zimmerman,
Present.
Britt Marie Cole Johnson,
Here.
Ellen McKitterick,
Present.
Mike Soltis will not be joining us today, and Holly Williams.
Present.
All right, we have a quorum.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if anybody's joining us from the public, but I would like to thank them for joining us this morning. Our first order of business is the meeting minutes from February 7th, 2023. I'd like to ask the committee for a review of the February 7th, 2023 minutes and a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Ellen. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. Michael is going to provide us with an update of the private plan audit guide.
Thank you very much. Hope everyone's excited to talk about private plan audits this morning. I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so 2 months ago, we had published the audit guide that we had created for private plans in the Connecticut Law Journal for notice and comment. And we did receive about a dozen comments, mostly from the insurance industry, about the audit guide itself. And it's sort of an all-in-one audit in a box approach to how we will handle audits going forward for private plans. So I just want to walk through the comments and kind of our responses to the comments, where we've made changes, where we haven't, and reflecting those comments. I tried to categorize them in sort of ways that made sense. They're not the exact comment. They're sort of a summary of the comments because some of the comments got kind of long, but I didn't want to waste everyone's time reading through pages of PowerPoints. So the first comment was about the kickoff meeting itself and asking about, we had built in some flexibility about what will go on in that first meeting for the audit. And we wanted to build in flexibility to make changes to that if needed. So a request was made about, can we provide more details on what changes will occur? We didn't want to make changes in response to this comment because we want to be flexible in what we do in that meeting, and we want to be able to anticipate, we don't want to have to anticipate employers' needs. We want to be able to respond to employers' needs for those kickoff meetings. So we're going to have that flexibility so we can kind of adjust based on what employers want us to do, as well as what we may learn as we go through the audit process. So that one we left as is with some flexibility in exactly what happens in that meeting in the guide. The next couple of comments are all related to how documents get shared. And there was a request related, making sure that they are shared securely, potentially asking for alternate options for sharing documents, such as providing access to their systems rather than sharing the documents themselves. And then also making sure that we can receive the documents directly from a TPA or insurance carrier rather than requiring everything that comes through the employer. We understand that those comments, we're totally on board with them. We have a solution that allows documents to be shared securely. We did contract with a vendor, Standard Fusion, that does allow documents to be shared securely, reviewed securely, and also allows those documents to be provided by any party. It doesn't have to be the employer. So we do have a solution for that. Also, nothing precludes us from having alternative options. So part of the kickoff meeting is we kind of walk through the steps of the audit. And then if there are any concerns or alternate arrangements that are necessary, we can obviously have a conversation about that and discuss it. So we're open to alternate options, such as potentially virtual access to a claim system, if that's the best approach on any given audit. The next few comments were all about the application audit. So this is making sure that the employee vote happened the way it was supposed to, that documents were provided the way they're supposed to prior to the approval of the private plan application. So a couple of specific comments related to that. One, asking if we could add electronic to the word written in a request for Word documents provided to you, written documents provided to you. we didn't think that was necessary. Written can include both printed, handwritten or electronic. That's all under the umbrella of written. So it's acceptable that they were provided electronically. The second was a request. Part of the process, we send out a survey to employees, essentially making sure that, did you get documents? When did you vote? Did you have the right to vote? Do you remember what you voted? Those sorts of questions. And a comment was made, could they add to the question the date that the vote occurred, sort of to trigger the memory of the employees as they fill out the survey. We don't want to do that. We want to be able to have the same survey questions every single audit, so it will be consistent across audits. So we don't want to have to kind of have modifications to individual survey questions, but we have a couple options. One option is employers can, when they send out the survey, supplement it with information about, we remember this vote that happened 3 months ago, include that in the communication. We just ask that the authority be able to review it to make sure it's actually not misleading. And then also every survey will have the option to provide, I do not recall, as an answer if the employee truly can't remember it. So we think that does cover that situation if employees don't remember exactly when the vote happened. And then finally, there was a comment about not just using the survey, but having alternate options for an employer to provide to show proof that they did send the documents to employees and that the vote actually happened. The authority agreed with this response, and we actually update our checklist to say if the survey's inconclusive, we will have an alternate arrangement for an employer to provide that proof that the actual vote happened, the application was filed appropriately. And I apologize if this is dragging on. I'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but feel free to interrupt me at any point if I'm not clear. These next couple of comments were related to the use of funds that are withheld from employee contributions. So I kind of grouped them together, although I think they're about two separate audit types. The first was a reference to a segregated account that employers can have, that they place the amounts they withheld from employees in a separate account. And the comment was about there's no requirement that they have the segregated account for those funds. So we should delete it from the checklist. We did not agree that we should delete it. We understand the concern, but employers are required to show that funds will not be used inappropriately. And the context of that checklist item is making it clear that the segregated account is one option for them. In fact, it's not even the first option. The first option is to show that they have protocols in place to make sure that funds are being used appropriately, that they're not withholding more than they're supposed to, things of that nature. And if that's insufficient, we may ask for follow-up information. One of the options is a segregated bank account. So while we agree there's not a requirement that there's a segregated bank account at the moment, it's also not a requirement in the audit that they provided. It's just a sample of one of the things that they can provide. And very similar for the second item, we do ask potentially for the solvency audit, when it's a self-funded plan, for the employer to justify that they have funds necessary to pay expenses. One of the options they can provide is an actuarial analysis or other documentation that showing that they have thought about it and have a reasonable expectation. The comment was we should potentially remove that from the checklist. We don't agree with that comment. Once again, it's an option available to them. We didn't want to be too vague and say, give us anything, but we also wanted to provide some samples of what the types of things we expect. One of those is the actual analysis, because employers ultimately, they have certified that they will be able to pay benefits under these private plans. And we want to ask for an explanation of how they have kind of thought about it and make sure that basis is reasonable, and that they will be able to pay benefits. So once again, it's not a requirement, it's a possible option to meet the requirement. There were 4 comments related to the claims audit specifically, and they're kind of very specific, so I'll just run through them hopefully quickly. One was about the initial template report that we asked for in the claims audit. This is basically a listing of every claim over the audit period, which then we would use to individually pick certain claims to ask for the full claim file. So we have a template of the sort of initial report we asked for. We'll be flexible with that report. If it needs to be in a different format, as long as it kind of allows us to individually identify which claims we want to review, we'll be open to it. The guide will keep the template as is, but we can discuss in the kickoff meeting any sort of modifications necessary or alternate reports. The second comment was related to a request for all documentation provided to support the claim. a request was made to modify that to just ask for all documentation provided to support the claim decision. I honestly don't know what the difference is, but we would prefer to err on the side of getting more documentation rather than less when it comes to what did you ask for as part of the private plan claim. Another comment was related to potentially limiting it to only the documents provided by the claimant. Similarly, we don't want to restrict it to just those documents. Any documents provided to support the claim should be provided. And often they may come from a healthcare provider. Maybe it's a TPA administering the claim and the information comes from the employer about wage data. We would want to be able to review that as part of the claims audit. So we didn't want to limit it in response to that comment. The last comment on this page was related to intermittent leaves. Typically, an intermittent leave is approved for a longer period of time, and then individual absences within the leave are also approved. So the question was about whether we were requesting the overall approval period or the individual decisions, and ultimately the authority needs both. Our goal is to make sure that these employees were paid appropriately, they receive the benefits to which they're entitled. So both the overall approval period and the individual approvals would be needed. And then the last comment about the claims audit was related to, we had a list at the end of our requested documents of other information we may ask for, and it was sort of broad. And it was the list started with, we may ask for these things. And so the request was to limit the types of things we may ask for as part of the claims audit. We didn't want to do that. Ultimately, that list was meant to be a sort of catch-all when the information we initially requested was insufficient. Here are the types of things we may ask for as a follow-up because it wasn't clear why the claim was paid a certain way. You know, the claim file is missing information. Maybe there's an internal best practice that meant they pay a different way. We want to make sure we review that because it's ultimately our responsibility to make sure these employees receive the benefits they're entitled to. And if it doesn't make sense from what we initially receive, we would ask for a follow-up. It wasn't intended to be every single audit will ask for that information. It was really meant to be this supplemental information on specific instances where it was insufficient information. Finally, and this last slide, I promise, this is about the report. So the process for these audits is we have an initial report and then an opportunity for the employer to respond to that initial report, and then a final draft of that same report, potentially incorporating the responses from the employer. So one comment was asking for the response to come from the employer or the TPA or insurer or other claims administrator. We understand that, and we're generally open to it, but ultimately it's the employer's responsibilities to make sure that these private plans are in compliance and that they are following all applicable laws. So the response really should come from them. They are free to ask for their TPA to help them. They're free to ask for their TPA to draft a response for them. But it's really the employer's responsibility to maintain compliance. And they're the ones who are on the hook for the private plan. So we would ask that response be coming from them. And then the last comment was related to confidentiality and privacy. And there was a request that the final report be kept confidential as an internal document to the agency, and that claims materials, trade secrets, sensitive and confidential information be kept from FOIA requests. We understand that comment. We intend to maintain all appropriate confidentiality when we draft these reports. The reports are meant to be conclusions of the audit, not diving into individual details. We're not going to be talking about employees' social security numbers or employees' medical records as part of the reports. It's meant to be conclusions. And then just making it clear, I think everyone already knows this, but just want to make it clear. The authority complies with the Freedom of Information Act. That act doesn't allow us to make something excluded or included based on how we label it. It's really about the intent of the document. So we can't call it an internal document and then therefore have it not be applicable to the Freedom of Information Act. But as we said, we understand the confidentiality. There's no intent to reveal any personal information about individual employees as part of the report. Just talk for a while. I'm happy to take any questions or comments about these responses.
Just a quick question. Thank you for such a thorough review. On the final report, the initial draft that comes from the employer, is there anywhere where they have to attest to the truthfulness of what's in the report? Or are they doing it under any kind of threat of penalty of any kind?
Good question. I apologize. I probably ran through that too quickly. So the initial draft still comes from us and they respond to it. So it's sort of, if we said we found that this claim was paid incorrectly and you didn't have protocols in place, it allows them to respond to it. We weren't thinking about making an attest to that but if you think that's a good idea, we can obviously add it.
Not suggesting, and I'm just wondering if that's where the comment came from. I'm wondering if employers are thinking they have to. It sounds like it's something they can just provide their comments to. It is not a document like what our claimant would fill out when they're applying for a leave.
Yeah, exactly. And we wouldn't expect them to lie or mislead us in that response. It ultimately wouldn't change how, I mean, if it's something that we find out is actually an accurate statement and we want to change the report as a response to that, we absolutely will do that, but it's not going to really impact the things that we found in the audit based on the response.
Okay.
Any other questions? Comments? Don't see any. Thank you, Michael, for walking us through that.
Thank you all.
I'm going to transition now to Erin, who's going to give us a legislative update.
Thank you so much. The first thing that we should do is introduce you all to Madeline Granado, who joined us yesterday as our Community and Government Relations Manager. Maddie comes to us from QUELF, the Connecticut Women's Education and Legal Fund. I said that in the right order, where she was the policy director. Previously, she had been the campaign director to bring paid leave to Connecticut. So she's been someone we've been working with for a long time and are thrilled to have her. So just wanted you all to meet Maddie. Maddie, would you like to say anything? There you go.
No, just good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and excited to get to work. So thank you. Thanks, Erin.
Terrific. So then let me just share my screen. There is, oops, let's get to the, so apart from welcoming Maddie, I wanted to just talk with you a little bit about 1179. Can you see my screen?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try that again. I was like, I'm not seeing you guys, so I don't think my screen shared. There we go.
Your screen now, Erin.
This looks much better. So there have been a handful of bills relating to the Connecticut paid leave program this year, but it looks like the only one that is likely to go forward that specifically relates to our program is Senate Bill 1179, which was posted last week and is on the agenda for hearing on Thursday. It does three things. It creates a definition of the word municipality that applies to both Connecticut paid leave and Connecticut FMLA. It creates a procedure to allow tribal enterprises and tribal governments to participate in CTPL paid leave. And it clarifies the provision regarding receipt of employer-provided benefits concurrently with our benefits. So with regard to municipality, as you know, our statute says that municipalities are not covered employers, although their employees have the right to bargain in. Connecticut FMLA also excludes municipalities and has since its beginning, but the word has never been defined, which is a problem because if you search the word municipality in the Connecticut statutes, you will find over 100 different hits for the term municipality means. And there are scores of different definitions for what municipality means. In the absence of a statutory definition, the authority adopted a multi-part definition by policy, which incorporates the definition of municipality and municipal employer. If you add up all of the subparts of just those two, you get over 25 different entities that may or may not be overlapping. And it's confusing to everyone. We still have to work with entities and payroll providers to figure out if somebody is or is not a municipality. So the legislature is seeking to define the term in a very clear, I think, and succinct way. It basically is, do you have the ability to levy and collect taxes? Becomes kind of the one question that would have to be asked, which I think is a much easier definition for everybody to apply. And it helps contain it to what the legislature, I think, was originally thinking and not necessarily to all of the quasi-municipal entities that are out there. Importantly, it has the same definition for both paid leave and FMLA because we don't want inconsistency. And so this is something that we have made DOL aware of when we knew that the legislature was contemplating this. The second thing that the bill would do is create a mechanism for tribal enterprises or employees of tribal enterprises and tribal governments to participate in the program. The original language was completely silent, and because of their sovereign status, silence meant that there could be no policy that would enable such employers to participate in our program. We needed language if the legislature wanted to allow it. So 1179 creates a procedure to allow tribal enterprises and governments to opt in. They're basically adapted the provision that relates to sole proprietors, which is our other kind of entity that can opt in. So similarly to sole props, if the tribal enterprises or a tribal government wants to opt in, they'd have to participate for at least 3 years. There'd be an automatic 1-year renewal unless they notify us of the intent to withdraw. And this way would also enable us to have the employees of such enterprises or governments contribute for the full 3 months before employees apply for benefits, which is our policy for sole props. And this is something that is just a good practice. They're not an overwhelming number of employees who work for tribal enterprises and governments. So if they do choose to opt in, we don't think that we would be overwhelmed. We don't think this really impacts the solvency of the program, but it is just a good practice to make sure that the contributions are in place before the benefits can be applied for. And finally, there's the issue of concurrent benefits. So subsection F of 3149G says that an employee could receive employer-provided benefits concurrently with our benefits as long as the total does not exceed 100% of the employee's regular wages. It's our understanding that the legislature wanted employees to be able to layer together these different sources of income replacement benefits, as long as you weren't going above that 100%. So we believe that that was the intent of the original legislation. But by establishing that 100% cap, it did not prevent employers from capping it at a lower percent. And in practice, what you see is most short-term disability insurance policies and employer administrative plans cap employees at usually about 60%. This has been an issue. It's not directly related to our program because we pay what we pay. But we've received complaints for over a year now from employees, from employers, from legislators, from the governor's office, from the federal delegation, because people are surprised. They were not expecting to be capped. The reason that these caps occur is because many benefit plans include offset language. This is something that's pretty common with group insurance plans, but you don't see it at all in individual policies that are purchased by an individual with their own money. And what happens, just by way of example, is say you have an employee who earns $1,000 a week. That employee would, if they were eligible, receive about $800 a week from us. That employee also has an employer-provided plan that would cover 60% of their income replacement. So the employee is expecting to receive $800 from us and $200 from the short-term disability plan to get to the $1,000 so that they can pay their bills while they're out. But because most plans include offset language, the employee receives $800 from us and nothing at all from the employer plan, because the employer says, you've already received more than the $600 we think you should get. This obviously is contrary to the idea of people getting concurrent benefits. And so Section 3 would say, look, insurance policies and employer-sponsored plans, so treating them equally, you can't take that reduction. You would not allow an offset unless the offset is necessary to prevent the person from getting more than their 100% wages. Essentially recognizing that CTPL leave is employee funded. And so for this purposes, treating them equivalent to an individual policy makes sense. I will say that this is probably the most controversial of the three elements. We know that the insurance industry is concerned about the impact because they change their premium rates depending on the benefits. But I also know that virtually everybody is surprised when their employees get zero instead of the difference. So if the legislature truly wants concurrency, we think this language is what needs to happen to achieve that. So that's what is in the bill. As I said, it's going to be heard on Thursday. I will be providing testimony relating to the three provisions. I will be in Washington State at a conference, so I'll be doing it through Zoom, but I will be there at the legislature remotely to be able to provide the testimony and answer questions. There are a few other bills. Well, there's a bunch of other bills we're watching, but none of them seem to have a very direct impact on us, at least as of yet. There are always some quasi-public bills that relate to our governance and oversight, but so far, there really hasn't been much movement to try to add additional oversight or constrain our ability to do the work we need. So that's a good thing. So any questions about the what we're watching at the legislature?
I have a quick question.
Yep.
If 1179 were passed and signed, which groups now are left out? Because we're almost getting to universality, where people either have an opt-in provision or are required participants. So what's the universe of groups that's left out, and if they remain left out, is there any potential legal challenge?
So the sovereign nations are able to opt in where they weren't able to before. So they're kind of in that medium's place. The slightly narrowing of the definition of municipality means that you still have, like, when everyone talks about the 169 municipalities in the state, like all of those towns and cities are still out. Their employees can opt in through collective bargaining, but until and unless that happens, they're out. Similarly, elementary and secondary schools are out. Employees of boards of education are out unless the employees negotiate through collective bargaining in. And then private elementary and secondary schools remain out. The federal government is still out because we can't tell them what to do, and the railroads are still out because they're under the national laws that govern them, which supersede ours. So we still have kind of the same large categories of entities that are not covered. What the narrowing of the definition of municipalities does is brings in entities like transit authorities, we believe housing authorities, because it does not appear that housing authorities have the ability to levy taxes. Not-for-profit entities that contract with towns to provide fire services have been excluded, but they would no longer be excluded. And there may be a few others. We would be looking for Office of Legislative Research actually to come up with a list of entities that are able to levy taxes, so that it's a clear and easily identifiable list of who counts as a municipality and therefore would not participate. I don't think that these changes would create any sort of opportunity for challenge, because it really just clarifies the original language as opposed to kind of creating kind of wildly new standards.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. That was responsive to my question. Are there any other questions or concerns?
I have a question, Erin, on this Holly's kind of dovetailing off of Holly's about who is still left out. So there was some talk in one of our meetings yesterday with our FMLA group here about some maybe proposed language around including non-certified people who work at schools. Is that part of 1179 as well?
That's a different bill. So there is a different bill that is not, and the language is not it does not include it in 1179. The other
Okay.
bill, which number I forget, would expand the provision in 3151R, maybe,
Mhm.
or RR. There's an existing language that says paraprofessionals in schools can access federal FMLA,
Mhm.
but they only have to have, I think, 950 hours instead of the 1250.
That's right.
So the separate bill would expand that statute to say other folks who work in schools who are not part of unions could access federal FMLA benefits. So if I'm remembering what the Labor Committee said at the meeting, they were thinking like maintenance staff, cafeteria workers, and the like. So that bill is completely separate. There's no discussion about bringing that population into the paid leave program. They would still be excluded as employees of a Board of Education.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification that that one's related to 3151 RR because I had a question on it.
Yeah, I think it's RR.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
That's the paraprofessional one. So
Well, I actually now have a follow-up question to that. Sorry, we went down a rabbit hole now. Similar to nonprofits that, well, I think I'm going to answer my question by asking the question. Similar to nonprofits that are fulfilling contractual obligations for fire support to districts, to the extent that a public school district contracts out for maintenance, cafeteria, or other services, those individuals would be covered because they're either a nonprofit or under a private employer that's contracted with the district. Okay. I had a feeling I was going to talk myself into the answer once I said it out loud, but I just needed to make sure that I actually made the statement so I was clear on what the response was. Okay. All right. Thank you for the little indulgence there. Do we have any other questions, comments? Let's see any. All right. Well, thank you for providing the update and welcome to the team, Maddie. It's always good to have someone who's a little pressure checked joining on the legislative side. So that concludes our business that's on the calendar today. Is there any old business? Any new business? Let's see any hands. All right, so may I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Thank you. Any opposed? No. Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. It's now 9:50. Have a good rest of your Tuesday, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Have a good one.
Thank you.